Arsenal's right-hand side is elite. Bukayo Saka and Jurriën Timber are world level, with Noni, Madueke and Ben White ready to slot in at any time as top quality backups. But on the left, it is a totally different story. Leandro Trossard, great technician but lacks pace. Eberechi Eze, not an out-and-out winger, and the less said about Gabriel Martinelli's end product, the better. However, if they addressed that problem in January, the Gunners could secure their first Premier League title since Dino was in nappies, and that was ages ago. But where do they find a Bukayo Saka clone who can play on the left to balance Arsenal out?
Well, enter Juventus star Kenan Yildiz, whose stats and tactical profile are just about as close as you can get. And in this video, we're going to explain why he's an essential transfer Arsenal must make in January.
Nice one, Dino, but before we dive into the details, hit me with Yildiz's essentials in 20 seconds. Let's have it.
Kenan Yildiz is 20, born in May 2005 in Regensburg, Germany. He's 6'1", a product of Bayern Munich's academy, and made his senior Juve debut aged 18. He's played 106 Juve games, has 26 Turkey caps already, earns 50k a week, has 3.5 years left on his deal, and super agent Jorge Mendes represents him. Now, why do Arsenal need him?
Kenan Yildiz currently sits 5th in Serie A for goals this season with 5, and he's Juve's top scorer so far. He's 3rd for assists in the league, and again, top at Juve with 4. Now, Bukayo Saka's goal contributions over the past 3 seasons dwarf those of any other Arsenal forward, and aside from leaving them exposed, if Saka is injured or suspended, that over-reliance, Dino, does have tactical consequences, doesn't it?
That's exactly right, Will, and those stats show why Arsenal are so over-reliant on Saka down this right-hand side and attack far more there than they do on the left. It's a little bit less so this season. They've balanced up a little bit more, but still, Yildiz would add much more on the left. The addition of him would give them that double threat in attack.
Now, although Trossard and Martinelli are sharing minutes a little more this campaign, Martinelli has started more matches at left wing than any other Arsenal player since the beginning of last season. So we've compared Yildiz's attacking metrics with Saka and Martinelli's, and Yildiz stands out like straight away. Firstly, his 0.39 goals per 90 minutes average is higher than both Arsenal players, and that's not just because he's taking more shots either, Dino, which you might think. All three have basically had identical shot averages at around 2.5 per 90 minutes this season. So Yildiz has simply been more clinical, to be honest, in front of goal when he gets there. But assists, as we'll see, is where he really stands out. He's serving up 0.31 assists per 90 minutes for his teammates in Serie A, but Saka is averaging just 0.08, and Martinelli hasn't provided a single assist for Arsenal all season.
Yeah, and added to that, also their expected goals and assists also show that Yildiz is getting in the right positions, more so than Martinelli, and that his teammates trust him enough to do something with it when he gets the ball.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Yildiz's expected assist rate is 0.26 per game, which is almost identical to Saka's, but he's way ahead of Martinelli. And although his expected goals rate, or XG, as most people will know, it is slightly lower than both. If you combine expected goals and assists, Yildiz is comfortably outperforming both Arsenal players.
Yeah, and he's doing that, don't forget, in a Juventus side that doesn't exactly flood the box and create that many chances. And even when you look at his crossing volume, where Saka clearly leads, Yildiz is still delivering nearly 4 crosses per 90, more than double Martinelli's output.
Yeah, exactly that. And he's far from anonymous between those big moments either. Obviously, we want our players to sort of be big moment players. Morgan Rogers is doing that very well recently for Villa, but it's about the sort of gameplay in between. So Yildiz 4.5 progressive carries per 90 minutes average. That's almost identical to Saka's again, but he's miles ahead of Martinelli. So it just shows he's like constantly moving the ball into dangerous areas before he actually delivers high quality end product at the end of it. So it's like best of both worlds. So from a purely statistical standpoint, it's clear Yildiz would be a huge upgrade on Martinelli, which, if you ask me, isn't that difficult to do. But he's obviously hitting Saka's levels as well. And even when considering the difference in quality between Serie A and the Premier League, what would Yildiz add though, Dino, from a tactical perspective? Yeah,
well, Martinelli thrives when the game is all over the place and he can run in behind, right? That's his pace, push it out of his feet and go. Where Saka is obviously much better is in these tight areas. And Arsenal often find themselves against a team that's going to do this. So, you know, a 4-5-1 shape, a low block, very, very little space between the lines. And so Yildiz would be in this position here. But Arteta sets them up with 2 sets of 3 out wide. So a 3 there and a 3 there, where perhaps the fullbacks push on and then you've got your 8 and then your winger. So if this is Yildiz, as Saka does, he needs to work well in tight spaces, get in between those 2 lines and be able to beat a defender 1v1 to create that chance.
Absolutely, and he sort of does it. What does Saka do so well that you think, because obviously we've sort of established there and we know Yildiz and Saka are similar players, what will Yildiz be able to do that Saka does well that Martinelli doesn't have in his wheelhouse at the moment, apart from the great end product?
Absolutely. Well, Yildiz, from watching Juve's games, is very good at understanding whether he wants to go wide, like Saka does, for their fullback to come underneath him and underlap, or he comes in and the fullback goes round the outside. And he can work in both those ways. And when you're a winger like him who can go both directions, that gives your fullback a big problem.
Makes perfect sense, Dino. Right, let's talk about progressing the ball. And this is where the Saka comparison really makes sense. Everyone talks about goals and assists, right? That's obvious. It's end product. It's what football's all about. But Arsenal's right-hand side works because Saka controls the game with the ball at his feet, but so does Yildiz, Dino, and the numbers prove it, right? Bukayo Saka at the moment is attempting 4.66 take-ons per 90 minutes. That's this season. That's more than double Martinelli's rate. We've all seen it, haven't we? Saka stands up a defender. Defender's got no idea which way he's going to go. He should be like dummies one way, blink of an eye, he's taking it round the other side. But that forces defenders to engage with him early and a bit higher up the pitch. But it's what happens after that that really matters, because Saka carries the ball, Dino, into the box on average 1.69 times per 90 minutes, which is why Arsenal are able to consistently maintain pressure down that right-hand side. You know, it's like defenders, they finally get the ball clear and then bang, Arsenal are coming back at them again. Now, compare that to Yildiz, whose take-on volume is much lower than both Saka and Martinelli, but he's carrying the ball into the penalty area, Dino, on average 2.33 times per 90 minutes, which is much more than Saka and Martinelli.
Yeah, and that tells you that his dribbles are purposeful. He's not just beating his man for the sake of it, like Martinelli might halfway up the field get into a position down a blind alley and turn back again.
Yep.
He's beating a man in the final third. He's breaking defensive lines and he's driving into the box. And as we've shown, creating or scoring goals on the back of it.
Yeah, exactly that. And he's not just making it happen on his own either. Yildiz is also playing 3.57 progressive passes into the penalty area, Dino. That's the key bit, per 90 minutes at the moment. That's significantly higher, again, than both Saka and Martinelli.
Yeah, and that's a massive stat because that's decision making. He's not just on the end of the attacks, he's helping move Arsenal up the pitch, or Juventus at this moment, up the pitch in the same way that Saka does on the right. And that will help teammates keep pressure on when he's unable to do that himself.
Now, one number that may be a concern, though, is dispossessions, with Yildiz having the ball nicked off him nearly twice a game, almost double Saka's rate of just 1.19 and higher than Martinelli's of 1.36.
Yeah, that is a concern, but he's only 20. He's playing high-risk football in tight areas and probably the only Juve player doing that as well. So that's a trade-off, and Arsenal already accept that with Saka. You take a bit of ball loss because for every possession turnover, he's just as likely to beat his man, get in the box and produce a goal.
Yeah, exactly, and that's sort of what it's all about. So when you put it all together, Saka gives Arsenal control on the right-hand side through ball retention, progression, and obviously providing goals and assists. And the data says Yildiz can offer the exact same thing on the left. So Dino, just tell us a little bit, how do Arsenal sort of currently progress the ball differently down those sides? We've seen already via the stats, and it's sort of common knowledge over the last sort of season and a half, even more than that, that the vast majority of Arsenal's attacks go down the right and less on the left. So how do they progress the ball differently on either side?
Yeah, there's a slight imbalance, as you say. So if they have the ball in the right centre-back position here, they're looking for a pass into Saka here. And that means then, obviously, the fullback gets drawn out. But Saka's a genius at taking the ball on the run. Yep. And so he might take the ball into this area when the 8's taken a runner away, and that space there is where he runs into that space. And then the attack's on. You know, red arrows flying in different directions. On the right side, because Ødegaard or Eze have been playing in this position here, and they naturally move over to try and help and support Eze, Saka, Timber in those areas, what happens is generally their left gets a little bit isolated and they get a little bit dragged to one side of the pitch. So if they've got a double threat, then they can do the same both sides. Imagine that as a midfield where you start to get split and dragged out and you can't defend favouring one side.
Now, an increasingly important weapon in Arsenal's left wing armoury is Leandro Trossard. We haven't really mentioned him too much. Eze, of course, is also an option, although Mikel Arteta does seem to prefer him in sort of more central positions so far. So in this section, we've examined how Yildiz compares with Trossard. Now, worth saying that Trossard has proved himself to be a very effective left wing alternative for for Arsenal, and his increased minutes this season suggest that Arteta is starting to trust him a little bit more than Martinelli. So for this one, we'll highlight a couple of stats to show what Yildiz offers that's different to the Belgian, not necessarily better. So if you just look at output, they're very, very similar, right? Trossard's goal rate is 0.45 per 90 minutes. That's actually slightly higher than Yildiz, while their assist average is almost identical. So it's not necessarily an end product issue, which maybe it probably is with Martinelli. It's about what happens between those big moments once again. So let's start with ball recoveries, where Yildiz averages 3.72 recoveries per 90 minutes, which is slightly higher than Trossard, but that tells you that he's a master in helping his team pick the ball up and win it back high up the pitch.
Which is what Arsenal love to do, of course.
Oh, exactly, yeah. So then we're back to ball progression, which is where the difference really shows between the two, right? Trossard averages 2.73 progressive carries per 90 minutes, with Yildiz up at 4.5, which is a massive jump. However, where Trossard does excel is higher progressive passing. He offers a higher rate at 4.02 per 90 minutes compared with Yildiz at just 3.81. So that's not into the penalty box, that's general progressive passing. But that means Yildiz is less likely to keep the structure in place and more likely to try and sort of do something himself.
Yeah, exactly. And those stats show why Trossard would still have something to offer Arsenal, and that Yildiz would be a direct replacement for Martinelli rather than Trossard. And it would be more of a tactical decision rather than the quality one for Mikel Arteta when deciding if it's Yildiz or Trossard and whether they should start in different games. They're different tools, different profiles, and Yildiz gives Arsenal something that they don't currently have on the left.
Yeah, precisely, Dino. So how do Arsenal play differently at the moment, sort of when Martinelli and Trossard's there, and how off the ball would Yildiz's ball recovery stats sort of impact how they press off the ball, play off the ball?
Yeah, well, I mean, going forward and attacking, we've explained that's fairly similar. Trossard's a very opportunistic player in those positions, so he scores his goals because he sniffs danger, so high quality in that. But Arsenal drop into a 4-4-2 shape when they defend, when the other team's got the ball, when the other team's playing out. And we often say that Martin Ødegaard is the trigger for that press. So if then Yildiz is on this side instead of Martinelli, sometimes I'm shouting at the screen when Martinelli's pressing when he shouldn't be. So if Ødegaard is the trigger for the press and they all go forward, and then you end up in this position here, Martinelli has got to curve his run here to block that passing lane off. He doesn't. He hares at the player and then allows a little bounce pass to go round him and then the other team's away. Whereas Yildiz has been much, much better at working as a group, schooled in Italian defending already, and understanding that if you go as a three, you can block off those lanes and maybe force that defender back into an area that he doesn't want to be. So he's a high quality presser already at a young age.
Fair enough. So we may expect those ball recovery stats to dip slightly, but he will still be an important part of helping
absolutely.
Arsenal.
Important cog in that Arteta pressing machine, definitely.
Makes perfect sense once again, Dino. Right, now it's one thing being an upgrade on Gabriel Martinelli, but how does Yildiz stack up against the Premier League's elite left wingers? So let's put him up against two of them who do very different jobs, to be fair, Jeremy Doku and Anthony Gordon, because this is where Yildiz's profile gets very, very interesting.
Yeah, that's right. Now, Doku, pure creator, right? Pace, everything. Gordon is much more of a finisher, and Yildiz sits somewhere in between those two.
So let's start with goals. Doku's averaging just 0.1 per 90 minutes this season, which is 1 every 10 full games, whereas Gordon is 3 times that at 0.29 per 90, and Yildiz's goal scoring rate is quadruple that of Doku at 0.39. Now, when you look at expected goals, Gordon leads at 0.44, which makes sense given the role he plays at Newcastle, how involved he is in their attacks. Yildiz, again, 0.26, comfortably above Jeremy Doku, who sits down at 0.13. So Yildiz is consistently getting into scoring positions, whereas if we look at assists, the picture is flipped entirely. Doku's out in front by a mile with 0.38 assists per 90 minutes. Gordon has none whatsoever this season, a la Martinelli, and Yildiz is bang in the middle of the two again at 0.31, kind of that hybrid thing, best of both worlds. It's the same story as well with expected assists, with Doku's expected assists being huge at 0.59, Gordon's much lower at 0.18, and Yildiz again sits between them at 0.26, showing that he's an all-rounder rather than just a one-trick pony. I think that's probably doing Doku and Gordon a disservice, to be fair. Now, Saka's expected goals and expected assists are fairly even, Dino, whereas Martinelli's XG is much higher than his expected assists, again, a la Gordon. So is there a tactical benefit to sort of having a player stronger at one rather than the other, or is having a player who can do both, like Yildiz and Saka, the benefit? It sounds obvious, but maybe there's a bit more of a tactical reason.
Yeah, in the way Arsenal play, absolutely you need the best of both. Jeremy Doku feeding Erling Haaland. Newcastle's tactics set up to get Anthony Gordon crashing the box in the last minute and being the finishing touch, right? Arsenal's tactical setup means there will be times in games where the game's dragged and stretched. You need someone to run in behind. They can do that. A lot of the time, though, as we talked about, deep-lying defences, needing creators, needing to be, those Swiss Army knife players who can do more than one thing.
A little callback to episode 1 there, Dino. Swiss Army knife, Lucien Agume, Sevilla star, why you should go to Manchester United. That's episode 1 of Essential Football Transfers. So if you haven't watched it already, get to SunSport's YouTube channel. Make sure you do after this, of course. But look, let's talk about ball progression, right? Doku's progressive carries, Dino, off the charts at 9.71 per 90 minutes. Gordon's at 5 on the nose, and Yildiz is lowest ranked out of the three of them at 4.5. Not a million miles off, of course, but you get the gist. But the key thing is what happens after those carries, with Yildiz taking 2.56 shots per 90 minutes, which is much higher than both Doku and Gordon. And in football, of course, end product is key. And his crossing output backs that up as well, with Doku and Gordon averaging just over 3 per 90 minutes, with Yildiz the highest at 3.8 crosses per game.
Yeah, it's worth noting there, though, there's a tactical element of that as well, where that's based on what the managers are instructing them to do in those areas.
Do you think Yildiz, and as we've seen, he's sort of that hybrid, can best of both worlds? Would his introduction see a change in approach from Mikel Arteta, or could it be the other way around, where the way Arsenal play would force Yildiz to change his game?
Well, Arteta's not going to change, is he? It's very, very structured. Trust the process, and it's been very successful so far, hasn't it? And they're marching on. So Yildiz will have to adapt, and he'll get used to the players around him. But one thing that he can bring, let's say that we've got Saka or Noni Madueke hugging the touchline this side. Instead of Yildiz hugging the touchline here, let's push Calafiori on perhaps, and the striker in there. And then you could end up with 2 10s in here. So Ødegaard or Eze and Yildiz playing as a triangle around the striker. And because of his close control and his ball ability, he can do that like Eze does. So
Juventus forward Kenan Yildiz looks like the missing piece on Arsenal's left, and the stats certainly suggest so. So now it's time to feed the facts and figures to SunSport's Fee Finder to see what it would take for Arsenal to get this deal done in January.
Yildiz is 20 years old, earns around £50,000 a week with 3.5 years left on his Juventus contract, and crucially has no release clause.
Arsenal were quoted £51 million to sign him in February 2024 by his stock, and therefore his price has surely only risen since.
Yeah, Man United are sniffing around, with Yildiz demanding a double your money deal to stay at Juve.
Elite left wingers Jeremy Doku, Anthony Gordon and Michael Elise all cost between £45 to £55 million recently.
Juventus are undergoing ongoing financial pressure, still managing wage reductions and player trading to balance the books, which means everyone has a price.
Yeah, of course they do. But Yildiz as well is one of their most valuable assets, a commercial draw and a fan favourite, so they want full market value and won't let him go on the cheap.
Availability-wise, no real red flags. He's missed just 3 games through injury and only 3 through suspension in 2.5 years.
Yeah, pretty good going. And although no clients of his agent, Jorge Mendes, currently play for Arsenal, Mendes represents some of the league's biggest stars, including Ruben Dias, Bernardo Silva and Lenny Yoro, not to mention Lamine Yamal at Barcelona, and he's conducted some of the biggest deals in world football.
Plus, don't forget that Premier League tax.
Yep, absolutely. Okay, so taking all of that into consideration, SunSport's Fee Finder expects Arsenal will need to cough up 80 million quid and a 6-year contract worth 100 grand a week to land a young superstar who other teams are also looking at, of course. Worth it, Dino, for Arsenal?
Absolutely. That's the price of giving Arsenal a Saka on the left and, of course, keeping that player out of the hands of their Prem rivals.
Yeah, quite right too, Dino. 2 things to consider there. Well, there you have it. Saka on the right gives Arsenal certainty. Yildiz on the left would give them symmetry. We know the Gunners are elite at the back, but this could make them just as devastating going forward and clinch them the Premier League title, which is why Kenan Yildiz is the essential transfer Arsenal must make in January. Please like this video. Thanks very much for watching. Make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave us a comment to let us know what you think of this one and who you'd like us to profile next time as we go throughout the January transfer window. Do not forget, we'll be releasing an episode of Essential Football Transfers every week between now and when it slams shut on February the 2nd. Do hope you join us.